This happened during spring break of my junior year of college. Me and my three closest friends, Kevin, Ali, and Seb, decided to escape the crushing pressure of finals and go car camping in the mountains of Colorado. We've been doing these kinds of trips together since freshman year, sort of a tradition to reset our brains. But that semester we were all broke. Instead of paying for a designated campground with amenities and neighbours, we opted for dispersed camping. I found this spot on one of those free camping apps. It was located somewhere outside of Buena Vista, tucked way back on a winding Forest Service road that seemed to stretch on forever into the wilderness. The four of us had done enough camping together that we weren't worried about the isolation. In fact, we welcomed it. We arrived late in the afternoon as the sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. We found a clearing near what looked like a dried-up creek bed. You could tell water had rushed through there years ago, carving out the earth, but now it was just smooth stones and silence. It was perfect, isolated, quiet. We didn't see any other tire tracks or fire rings, which meant we had the entire place to ourselves. We set up our tents in a loose cluster, maybe 15 feet apart from each other, just wherever the ground was flat enough. Nothing fancy, no specific geometry to it, just four friends claiming their sleeping spots for the night. I don't remember much about what we did that evening. We probably drank cheap beer, played cards by lantern light, and laughed about stupid things. By 11 p.m., the exhaustion from the long drive hit us, and we all retreated to our separate tents. Now here's the thing you need to know about me. I am a terrible sleeper. Even in my own bed, in a climate-controlled room with blackout curtains, I wake up multiple times a night. When I'm camping, forget it. Every twig snap, every gust of wind wakes me up. I usually barely sleep at all. But that night was different. I fell into a sleep so deep and heavy, it felt unnatural, like I had been drugged or sedated. I didn't dream. I didn't toss and turn. I just shut down. When I woke up the next morning, the air was crisp and cold. I unzipped my tent fly to let in some fresh morning light, expecting to see the chaotic arrangement of our campsite. Instead, I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. All four of our tents had been moved, not just nudged, not blown by the wind. They had been physically picked up and relocated. They were now arranged in a perfect geometric square formation, each tent facing inward toward a center point. And in that center point sat a pile of stones that definitely hadn't been there the night before. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't a prank. The tents weren't messy. The stakes were driven perfectly into the ground. I checked inside my tent. My sleeping bag was undisturbed. My phone was plugged into my battery bank. My water bottle was exactly where I left it. Nothing was missing. Yet I had been moved 20 feet while I slept inside and I hadn't felt a thing. I yelled for my friends. Kevin emerged first, rubbing his eyes, and I watched his face go from sleepy confusion to pure horror as he realized his location had changed. Ali and Seb crawled out moments later, and the silence that fell over the group was heavy. None of us remembered anything. We stood there in the center of this impossible square, trying to rationalize the irrational. Then Ali spoke up. her voice shaking. She said she had a vivid dream about walking in a line through a vast, empty desert while a voice counted her steps out loud. Kevin went pale. He said he dreamt he was a soldier, marching in perfect unison with a platoon. Ali and Kevin had dreamed of forced rhythmic movement. Seb and I had dreamless black sleep. It felt like we were connected, like our minds were syncing up in a way that violated the laws of nature. I looked at my friends and felt a sensation I can only describe as being watched by a fifth person who was standing right next to us, invisible but palpable. We started investigating the ground. That's when Kevin found the drag marks. In the dirt, there were faint lines leading from our original spots toward our new locations, but the marks stopped 10 feet short of where the tents currently sat. It was as if someone, or something, had dragged us part of the way, then lifted us into the air to place us down gently. We turned our attention to the stone pile in the center. 4 river stones, balanced precariously on top of each other in a gravity-defying sculpture. It looked ritualistic. Kevin, trying to get a closer look, leaned in and accidentally kicked the base. The stones tumbled down with a clatter. The moment those stones hit the dirt, the silence of the forest was shattered. A low, grinding rumble began to emanate from the ground beneath us. It wasn't an earthquake. It sounded like massive stone doors dragging against each other deep underground. The sound vibrated in our chests, a frequency that triggered pure, primal panic. We didn't speak. We didn't discuss a plan. We just moved. We tore down that campsite in under 5 minutes, throwing gear into the car haphazardly. As we drove away, the feeling of dread was suffocating. We never spoke about that night again. Years have passed. Kevin moved to Denver. Ali is in California. Seb is in Chicago. We drifted apart. Maybe because looking at each other reminds us of the morning we woke up in a perfect square, moved by hands we never saw for a purpose we never understood. My name is Simon, and this happened last summer when I was 23. My girlfriend Cadence and I had been planning a romantic getaway for months. Just the two of us, deep in the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. We needed a break from the routine, a chance to reconnect without cell service or distractions. I found a campground online located 3 miles down a rough forest service road. It was small, only 6 or 7 sites, and promised seclusion. We arrived on a Friday just before sunset. My truck bounced over the potholes and loose gravel, but we made it to the main clearing without issues. It was a beautiful spot. Tall pines, scattered picnic tables, and primitive fire rings. There was only one other vehicle there, a beat-up blue sedan parked at a site near the entrance, but I didn't see anyone around it. We drove to the far end of the campground, where the road dead-ended into the dense woods. It was perfect. Privacy, nature, and silence. We set up our tent, got a fire crackling, and settled in for the night. We were drinking beer, watching the flames dance, and finally relaxing. Around 10:12 p.m., Cadence went to brush her teeth at the communal spigot near the center of the campground. I stayed by the fire, poking the embers. That's when I noticed him. A man was standing at the edge of our campsite, just beyond the ring of firelight. He hadn't made a sound. I jumped, startled. He apologized smoothly, introducing himself as Aiden, the guy from the blue sedan. He looked about 30, with an intensity in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. When Cadence returned, Aiden's demeanor shifted. He ignored me completely and focused entirely on her. He complimented our spot, calling it real secluded, and kept the conversation going far longer than was polite. It was awkward and intrusive. Eventually I lied and said we were tired, forcing him to leave. He walked back into the darkness without a flashlight, which struck me as odd. That night I woke up abruptly. It wasn't a noise that woke me. It was the feeling of presence. Then I heard it. Voices. 2 people having a hushed conversation right outside our tent. I looked at Cadence. She was fast asleep. Protective instinct kicking in, I quietly unzipped the tent flap and poked my head out. Silence. The voices cut off instantly. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight around the perimeter. Nothing. No footprints, no movement, just the dark woods staring back. I assumed it was other campers arriving late and went back to sleep, dismissing it. The next day we went hiking and had a great time, almost forgetting about the weird encounter. But when we returned to our site in the late afternoon to gather firewood, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck was a folded napkin. I opened it. In scribbled handwriting, it read, "You should move your tent." I showed Cadence. She immediately asked if it was Aiden. I was furious. I marched over to his site to confront him. He was there, wearing the exact same clothes as the day before. Before I could yell, he cut me off with a strange, frantic energy. He claimed he didn't write the note to scare us, but to warn us. He said weird things happened in these woods. He talked about finding abandoned campsites with gear left behind, hearing footsteps around his car at night. He said he was leaving before sunset and advised us to do the same. It sounded crazy, but the fear in his eyes looked real. Cadence was spooked. We decided not to risk it. We started packing up as the sun began to dip below the tree line. Cadence's hands were shaking as she shoved sleeping bags into the truck. The atmosphere had shifted from peaceful to menacing. As we drove out, I saw Aiden's blue sedan still parked at his site. He was crouched by the rear tire. I stopped, despite my gut telling me to keep driving. I rolled down the window. Aiden stepped back to reveal a massive gash in his tire. It had been slashed, deliberately. He asked for a ride. Cadence squeezed my arm, whispering a terrified no. I told him I couldn't take him, but would call the police as soon as I got service. I sped away, guilt and fear warring in my chest. About 100 yards down the dirt road, my headlights swept across the woods to my right. I slammed on the brakes. Standing in the trees, about 30 feet off the road, were 3 figures. They weren't hiding. They were standing perfectly still, watching us. I locked eyes with one of them for a split second. Cadence screamed, "Drive! Just drive!" I floored it. My truck fishtailed on the gravel as we tore out of that forest. I called 911 the moment we hit the highway. I told them about Aiden, the slashed tire, and the figures in the woods. We never heard back. To this day, I don't know if Aiden was a victim like us or if he was the bait to get us to stop our car in the dark. This happened just 2 days ago. I'm a 28-year-old IT consultant living in Bozeman, Montana. I was going through a rough divorce and needed to disappear for a while. I wanted isolation. Real isolation. I found some coordinates on an old backcountry forum for a spot deep in the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest. I loaded my truck with a week's worth of supplies and my Remington 700 rifle because in Montana you don't go into the deep woods unarmed. The drive was brutal. The final stretch was an overgrown logging trail that hadn't seen a vehicle in years. When I finally reached the clearing, I thought I had found paradise until I saw the tent. It was an old, olive drab canvas tent, the kind from the 80s, sitting in the middle of the clearing. It looked abandoned. Moss was growing on the roof. I walked over and called out. No answer. The zipper was partially open, so I pulled it back. The smell hit me like a physical blow, the stench of rot and decay. I gagged but looked inside. It was empty of people, but there were soup cans, a sleeping bag, and a small notebook. I grabbed the notebook and backed out, needing fresh air. I flipped through the pages. They were filled with tally marks. Groups of 7, page after page of obsessive counting. The last page ended at 42 groups, over 8 months of counting. I should have left right then. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I decided to set up my camp on the opposite side of the clearing, keeping a wary eye on the mouldy tent. Night fell, and the sky turned into a canvas of stars. I fell asleep exhausted. Sometime in the dead of night I woke up. I lay perfectly still, listening. Then I heard it. Whispers, 2 or 3 distinct voices, hushed and urgent, right outside my tent. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was miles from civilization. There shouldn't be anyone here. The voices stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps circling my tent. Slow, deliberate steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. My hand found the grip of my rifle. Then the tent fabric depressed. Someone was running a hand along the outside of my tent. The zipper jiggled. I had clipped it shut from the inside so it didn't open. The person outside started scratching at the canvas, a frantic, rhythmic scratching like an animal trying to dig in. That was it. I racked the bolt of my rifle, the metallic clack-clack echoing loudly in the silence. I shouted, "I have a gun. Back off." The scratching stopped instantly. A few seconds of heavy silence passed. Then the sound of running. Multiple sets of footsteps sprinting away into the woods in different directions. It sounded like at least 3 people scattering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, sitting up with my rifle pointed at the door. At first light, I burst out of my tent, weapon ready. I looked across the clearing. The mouldy green tent was gone. I walked over to where it had stood. There was nothing. No flattened grass. No stake holes. No sign that a tent had ever been there. But I knew what I saw. I had smelled it. I had touched it. Then I looked at the ground around my own tent. In a wide circle, about 20 feet out, the dirt was churned up with footprints. Bare, human footprints. Dozens of them, different sizes. They had been standing there watching me, circling me. One set of prints led to a large pine tree at the edge of the clearing. I followed them. Fresh cuts bled sap from the bark. Tally marks. 7 groups of 7 and the start of an 8th. They were counting me, or counting the days. I backed away, terrified. That's when I looked up. Hanging from a low branch tied with fishing line was a dead squirrel. It wasn't fresh. It was positioned like a warning, a grotesque ornament. I ran. I threw my gear into the truck, not caring about organisation. I reversed down that overgrown trail faster than was safe, expecting an ambush at every turn. I made it out. I'm back in Bozeman now, safe in my apartment, but I can't stop thinking about the notebook. I kept it, and sometimes when I look at the tally marks, I wonder if the person who wrote them escaped, or if they became part of the group that circles tents in the dark.